I'm Debbie Schwartz, founder of Road to College and the Paying for College 101 group. Brad Schiller is the founder and CEO of Prompt. We've actually been partnering with Prompt. Is this the fourth year, Brad? I couldn't remember if 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, something like that.
It's been a great relationship. Prompt does an amazing job helping and coaching students on the essays and anything written that's related to the college application. And I got this question last time we kind of did some sessions, and I thought it would be fair to tell everybody, a little bit more about why we partnered with Prompt. It's not just random. We really feel that they provide an excellent service at a great price. And really what's important to me, and Brad, maybe if you want to elaborate on, I'm always like data. I like to have a really solid approach to whatever, I'm doing with people. And I think that Brad and Prompt does that. They've reviewed over 30,000 essays. And when you get that type of,
we've worked with over 30,000 students.
Wow.
We've reviewed hundreds of thousands of essays. So
right, even more.
Yeah.
And that just provides tremendous insight that you can't get anyplace else. So, and then you'll see tonight that they have a certain framework, which they teach students and that they use when evaluating essays. And I think, all of that, the data, the vetting of their own counselors and coaches and the framework and the value for the price make it, an excellent service. And that's why we partner with Brad and Prompt.
Yeah. And I know, I think it was your son a couple of years ago also used some of our reviews.
And I had personal, experience with my own son, and they did a great job. So, so for all those reasons, it's not just a fly-by-night connection. We really do.
But we have known each other for many years, so
yes,
that is very much true. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to, there's like a bunch of stuff that we're going to cover and talk about today. And it's going to be a lot of fun, really valuable for parents, students, kind of anybody here. I'm going to go ahead and enter slideshow mode. We got lots of stuff, fun stuff to cover. But basically, the first thing we're going to talk about is the importance of essays kind of in the admissions process. So when essays are important, when essays are not important, how to actually write these essays that match with what colleges are actually looking for. We're going to talk a little bit even about how many essays you may need to write. That's surprising for a good number of people. We're going to look at an example essay, first draft, final version of it. We're going to talk a little bit about our coaching. We work with hundreds of Road to College families every year and thousands of students. We'll wrap up with some Q&A. That's the general gist of things today. Just a real quick intro to us. So we've coached over 30,000 students one-on-one, including hundreds of Road to College families. And we have a lot of success. So 98% of the students that we work with get into one or more of their top choice colleges, defined as kind of like what they're defining as kind of reach or kind of target schools, okay, that they're applying to. We'll talk more about our coaching later, but we do have a special discount through Sunday that you can access from myprompt.com/road-to-college. And we have a special extra tonight only discount, which we'll talk about later, but you can see that on the website now. So if you want to, this is a pretty exciting session, but if you get a little bored or you find your mind wandering, feel free to go there and check it out. All right. So let's start by talking about what do admissions officers care about? Okay. So, I'm a writing educator. Okay, that's why we got into this in the first place, and we really focus a lot on written feedback, coaching, instruction, etc. Right across our entire business. We work with many tens of thousands of students, not just on college admissions essays. And so the number one thing is like when you're writing something, you really need to understand your audience. Okay, and so that's what we're going to talk about here. Is like what are actually admissions officers looking at in their applications. And so the number one thing, this is like the simple way to think about this, is that admissions officers want to know your student will succeed in college and after they graduate. That is what they're trying to determine in your student's application. Okay. That's what everything kind of needs to be associated with. And how do they do that? Well, they're evaluating students from a holistic perspective. Okay. So they're looking at your academics, where they actually calculate an academic score that's based off of your grades, the strength of your curriculum you've taken, such as like AP classes, etc. Your high school actually matters a lot. So they even take a look at, oh, have you taken the strongest curriculum that you have, or what's the curriculum that you've taken compared to like what is allowable even at your school. They even take a look at sometimes past students that have gone on to that particular college and how they've performed at that college. So they have a good sense of like, hey, this student is coming from this high school, the student is more likely to be successful. And then your test scores. So yes, a lot of stuff is test optional these days, but if you have AP scores or IB scores, that's also getting included kind of in this academic score. Okay. So that's number one. Number two is what we call the personal score. So this is the kind of non-academics part of your application. So this is your activities list and like basically and how you write about your activities, your essays, what you write about and how you write about it, your recommendations, and maybe an interview if applicable. Okay. And then the schools have like these other priorities. You don't need to worry as much about these, but because you can't really change it all that much. But, it could have to do with like family income, first generation students, different geographies they're trying to pull from, whether or not you're a legacy at a school, an athlete, the, child of a staff member at the college. Like these are all things that they care about. But the one I'll just highlight is demonstrated interest. And I'm sure you've seen some stuff from Debbie on demonstrated interest. But this one matters quite a bit because guess what? A school, when they accept you, they want you to actually attend. Okay. That's why they accepted you. And if you don't attend, that actually hurts their some of their statistics called yield, which actually negatively affects their US News rankings. So if they think, hey, if I accept Debbie, I'm not sure if Debbie is going to attend, they'd be much less likely to accept Debbie than maybe Naomi, who is like, literally attended every single event, showed up on campus, like demonstrated a ton of interest, and is more clearly, might be more willing to show up, even if Debbie is, on paper might be better than Naomi. So that also really does matter. We're not going to focus on that today, but I just want to call that out, that's something that you should think about. And Debbie, I know, has good materials on that. Okay. So let's talk through like kind of how this works. So the simplest way to think about this, and this is actually kind of like how many colleges look at this, is they basically take your academic score and they take your personal score and you can kind of put it on a chart. Okay. Where the higher your academic and personal score are, the more likely you are to get into a college. But there's a couple of really key concepts. One is what we call the academic bar. Okay. And so what this means is that at most colleges, they know that there's a certain level of academics that once a student has surpassed that level of academics, that they are likely to succeed academically at their college. Okay. So if you're below their academic bar, they're highly unlikely to accept you. Okay. And if you're above the academic bar, you dramatically increase your chances of acceptance. All right. So that's, and a lot of your academics are mostly baked in at this point. You've taken AP exams, maybe this part of the year your student has. And so, that is more or less going to be in place. And then the second thing is there's a personal bar as well. So this is more rare, but basically to be below the personal bar at most schools, like you need to write your essay on something that's like, hey, I robbed a bank. Like, I mean, just like you are a bad person. Okay. Like that is kind of the general genesis of the personal bar, right? So relatively few there. And so let's take a look at actually how does this stem or what happens here. And what you actually find is that roughly speaking, 4 and 5 applicants to any given school, and these are mostly focused on more selective institutions, but 4 and 5 applicants are actually academically qualified for a particular college. Okay. That's because most students are figuring out where they're going to apply based off of their academics, right? So you're looking maybe at a test score if you have one, or your grade point averages. You're like, hey, I've taken a bunch of APs. I have a strong curriculum, whatever it is. You're using that information to decide where you're going to apply. Everybody else is as well. Okay. And so the rough gist of it is like, hey, think about it this way. 4 in 5 applicants where you're applying are probably academically qualified, where if the school accepted that student, they know that that student's going to be academically successful at that school. Okay. And roughly 20% of the, or roughly, what is it? 2 in 5 students, or 40% of students have like kind of more strong academics. Okay. And then exceptional academics, at least this is a chart for actually based off of Harvard's data, because they had to publicly release it as part of some court cases that were recently or are currently happening in many cases. And there's very few that kind of fit into that particular category. Okay. But generally speaking, is that, hey, once you get above that academic bar, you're kind of in play for being accepted to a school. If you have strong academics, obviously that puts you in even a stronger position. But if you think about it, if I have 4 or 5 applicants to a given college, if I get 60,000 applicants like Harvard does a year, 50,000 of those applicants they believe are actually academically capable of doing the work at Harvard, yet they only accept 2,000 students. Okay, that's the math. So this is where essays come in. This is why they're so important, because actually on the personal score side of things, only 1 in 5 applicants actually set themselves apart. And keep in mind, this is in a pool of very highly motivated students, that only 1 in 5 of those students actually set themselves apart. Okay. And this is what it comes down to. And this is what we're going to be talking about tonight, is that what matters is what you write about, not just what you write about, but how you write about it. Okay. And what you find is that from the data, having strong academics can increase your admissions chances by 3x. So basically moving from like just above the academic bar to that strong category. But having strong non-academics, right, your essays, this personal score, increases your admissions chances by 10x. That's what the data shows. All right. So this is where you want to spend some time. All right. And if you can invest in this and tell your story really, really well in a way that helps colleges understand that you're more likely to succeed in college, and beyond, you're going to be in really good shape. Okay. All right. Well, let's talk a little bit about when essays matter and when they don't. Then we're going to get into the content of essays. So when essays matter. Okay. So essays tend to matter a lot more for highly selective colleges, right? These are institutions with under a 15% admit rate. These are more and more colleges every year, because the number of applications basically per student keeps going up every year. So colleges are getting more and more applicants every year. Essays really matter a lot. These are the schools where, hey, 80% of applicants are, relatively similar academically, and they need to differentiate between many of those students. Somehow they're using essays, right, to a large degree. The second component is then selective colleges. So these are 15 to 50% admit rates, where your academics might be sufficient, so just above the academic bar, but not strong compared to other applicants. That's when essays can really come into play and be that tipping point to get you accepted. And then the third is larger colleges where you're applying to highly desirable programs. Okay. So I'll give you an example, right? So like if you're applying to the University of Washington, their acceptance admissions rate, I think, is over 50%. But if you're applying for computer science, it's under 20%, I believe. Okay. So there's certain programs at certain colleges that just have, a certain number of seats per year, and they're just much more difficult to get into. This could be computer science. This could be engineering pretty commonly, a lot of medical related programs, nursing related programs, honors colleges, etc. Those are all programs that tend to have, potentially lower admissions rates depending on the institution you're applying to. Okay. And that's something important to consider. Essays matter less for selective colleges where your academics are strong compared to other applicants, as well as large colleges where you're applying in-state or applying to less competitive programs. Okay. So if you're applying to humanities in some of these schools, that have 70 or 80% normal admissions rates, like, okay, your essay may not matter all that much. Okay. So that's kind of the general gist of things. Now, I always get the question, like, how do I know where I am at academically? right, compared to other applicants? And the answer is it's really hard to know, because guess what? These colleges aren't out there kind of publishing their data that says, hey, this is what the academic bar is for our college. You can take a look at some, they're required to publish like SAT scores or ACT scores. So if you've taken those exams and you find that your scores in, let's say, like the top quartile of students that are that they've accepted, you're probably in that strong academics category. There's a good chance you might be in that strong academics category, provided you have pretty good grades. Okay. But other than that, it's really hard to tell, because GPA is not a great measure of comparison across students, because different students have different kind of curriculums, different, like all sorts of other things. Okay. But you could get a good sense of this, like of maybe where you're at if you have a test score, or just taking a look at your grades and how many, like, hey, have you taken a really strong curriculum and have really strong grades as compared to what your school actually offers? That is something that could give you a sense of where you fit there. All right, so let's talk a little bit about how many essays you'll actually need to write across your applications. This is a little bit surprising to some people that have not had a student go through this admissions process yet. But some students are writing like 50, 60, 70 plus essays in some cases across all of their applications. But this is kind of the general rule of thumb. So if you're applying to less selective colleges, you might be writing like no essays. You might write just one essay, the common application essay, which is the same essay used a lot across a lot of schools. You might be writing a couple of extra essays that we call these supplements that a specific school wants to see. And so you're writing somewhere 0 to 5 essays. But for more selective colleges, basically, the lower the admit rates, the more essays that they tend to ask for. And so you might be writing 5 to 20 essays, or as I said, in some cases for highly selective colleges, some colleges have 2 essays, 1 essay, some have 8 essays. Some of them, those 8 essays tend to be a little shorter, maybe 50 words, 100 words, 250 words. But all of these essays matter for these schools, because why else are they asking for this information if it was not valuable for them? Okay. But my key point here is, like, there's a lot of work here. Okay. And all of these components are really important. So let's talk about what colleges are and aren't actually looking for in essays. And so once again, like, the purpose of the college application is to prove that your students will succeed in college and after they graduate. All right. Now, this takes me kind of what I always say is the biggest myth in all of essays. Okay. Because when you actually ask people, what do I need to do in my essays? The number one response you get is either, hey, we just want to know your story, or like the number 2 response is, we just want to get to know you. Okay. But both of those are kind of incomplete pieces of information, because that can mean a lot of different things. And what really comes down to is that this is really about telling your story that proves you'll be successful in college and beyond. So how do you actually do that? It's by actually writing essays and writing the content about one of the or more of these 5 traits that colleges look for in applicants. So this is like probably the most screenshotted / picture taken / note taken slide in this entire thing. Okay. And it really comes down to displaying one or more of these 5 traits in a lot of depth. I'm going to spend a good amount of time here. But before we dive into that, Debbie, was there anything that I kind of missed? Because usually you've interrupted me like 2 or 3 times by now.
Yeah, not yet. I think some people are just soaking in what you have to say.
All right. Oh, by the way, we forgot, like, if you have questions, drop them into
Yes.
the chat. Debbie's looking at these. We'll take them kind of as we go. Obviously, there's Q&A at the end, but we're going to spend a bit of time here because this really matters. Okay. So these are the 5 traits that colleges are looking for in applicants.
Okay.
The first is
Water and half of it.
okay. So driven students, like, they're the ones that kind of push themselves to succeed no matter what, right? So whenever they're in a challenging situation, they're getting through it, but they're not just getting through it. They're actually like actively making their situation better as a result of the actions that they're taking. And usually they're coming out a better person in some way, shape, or form, or at least have learned something about themselves. Colleges love driven students. And the reason why they like driven students is that when you're in college or your students in college, they're probably going to come across some sort of challenging situation. And guess what? They want to know that that student's more likely to get through that challenging situation, because they want the student to actually succeed in college and graduate. that's an important metric for them. Because if the student drops out, that's not good for them. They don't get the tuition dollars. That affects some of the metrics that they have. That might affect their US News rankings. So they really want students that are driven, right? So that way they succeed in college, but also this is helpful when students are alumni, when they're in challenging situations, they're more likely to get through them. All of that reflects well back on the school, okay? So colleges love driven students so much that when I was speaking with the Dean of Admissions from MIT a number of years ago, we were talking about the 5 traits. And one of the things that he mentioned was they're looking for unusually driven students. Okay. So in other words, in a pool of very, very driven applicants, they are looking for applicants that are set themselves apart as being unusually driven, even amongst the most driven students. Okay. This is like the number one thing that they were looking for as they were reading through essays and the applications, is like figuring out how driven is this student really. The second is intellectual curiosity. So these are students that love learning just for the fun of it. A lot of this is time learning about things in their free time to gain a deeper understanding of certain subjects and topics in which they're interested in, okay? This is something that students miss a lot because a lot of students actually have certain topics, have certain interests they spend a lot of time on, but guess what? They think that's normal for them, right? It's like normal for them, that nobody's gonna be interested in that. And guess what? Colleges really are interested in that. And they're so interested in that because guess what? When a student's in college, it's really helpful if they really like to learn about the subjects that they're actually interested in and learning about, because that might be what they're majoring in. And those are students that are more likely to be successful. And then also that lifelong learning skill kind of translates into later in life, which leads to more successful alumni, which leads to those alumni recommending other students to go to the school, or more prestige for the school, or alumni donations back to the school, all things schools like. This matters so much, intellectual curiosity, that Stanford has an essay that's kind of famous, like this extra essay, supplemental essay to write, that's on intellectual curiosity. Emory University actually calls their personal score the intellectual curiosity score, actually in the admissions process, okay? The third trait is initiative. So these are students that are really tend to be entrepreneurial. They're not willing to accept the status quo. Basically, any kind of organization or thing they're a part of, they're like kind of identifying what's wrong with it, or like how to make it better. And not only are they identifying how to make it better, they're actually actively acting on improving things. Okay. So a lot of times these are people that are the leaders, whether or not it's a formal role or an informal leadership role, they're the ones that are constantly making things better. Okay. Fourth is contribution. So these are the students that are kind of the glue of the community, right? So these are students, no matter what group of people that they're a part of, that group is much better as a result of that student being there, okay? Colleges love contributors because number one, there's not a ton of contributors or super contributors, but number two is these are the connective tissue across the entire campus community. These are the people that are kind of connecting groups of people together, making things better on the campus community, leaving things a lot better than they found them, right? So if you think about like the value of why people are paying for a college education, a lot of it's the network, right? A lot of it's the community. A lot of it's those lifelong relationships that you build with other people. And what's great about that is like, that's why they want these contributors, because those are the people that are kind of making the campus community like that, the great place that they expect it to be. And then fifth is diversity of experiences and interests. So these are students that have different life experiences, different interests and ways of thinking about the world. These students add unique perspectives to the student body, right? So they're trying to build a well-rounded class. They don't want necessarily always a well-rounded person, but they want a well-rounded class where people have a lot of different interests. They can share those interests, they can collaborate, they can work together, they can learn from one another, and that's actually really important to them as well. Okay, so these are the 5 traits. And when you're writing your essays, you want to focus on one or more of these traits. You don't even have to focus on all 5 of these traits across all of your essays or within one essay. You really want to focus on your 2 or 3 biggest strengths. And when you're writing multiple essays, a lot of times you want to keep focusing on your strengths. So you want to show yourself, like, if you're an unusually driven student or an unusually intellectually curious student, you're not just driven in one situation, you're driven in literally every single situation in your life, okay? Or intellectually curious in every single moment in your life. And you want to show that, right? You don't want to just show one example. You want to show a multitude of examples that basically just prove to the admissions officer that, yep, the student's unusually driven or unusually intellectually curious, or just like have an unusual leadership ability, or like is one of those super contributors, or has super deep interest and knowledge in some like climate change or some other interest area. Okay. All right. Any questions or things pop up there that were in your mind, things that we might have forgotten, Debbie, before we move on?
No, this is great. No questions yet. It's a quiet crew tonight.
Come on. We'll have a lot. Don't worry. So the other thing that's really important here about essays is that all of what we learned is, by the way, actually fairly different than maybe the example essays of good college essays that you see online. Okay. Because to have those 5 traits, one or more of those 5 traits come across in your essay, what matters is the content, the clarity with which you are writing, so it comes across really well, and readability, which is basically like how easy is it for somebody to read and understand what you have written. Okay. That's what matters. Because why are they having you write these essays? This is not a creative writing experiment. Although University of Chicago does have an essay that is kind of a creative writing experiment. But besides that, this is not a creative writing experiment. So like all the creativity, the beautiful prose, these metaphors that you might see in these example essays that are online, those are things that matter way less than you think and basically don't matter at all. Okay. Why are those example essays online? It's because they're fun to read. Nobody's putting essays online. They're like, hey, I'm going to look at examples of essays that are like boring essays that are really have good content that got the student in. Okay. Instead, the New York Times, when they publish college admissions essays every year, they want the story that's like really interesting and like beautiful prose and with metaphors and all that sort of stuff. But guess what? That's not the thing that gets students into college, right? It's the content of what you've written about. It's proving those 5 traits, doing that in a really clear and readable way, because the average admissions officer is only spending 8 minutes reading the entire application, not just the essays, evaluating the entire application and making their notes on the application. Okay. So that means that the reader has to be able to read through the essay very quickly, understand it really easily, and not have to be confused and have to figure things out and have to reread a bunch of stuff. That's not what you want them to do. Right. The other thing I'm going to talk about is that there's no such thing as a bad topic, provided it relates to one or more of the 5 traits. Okay. We get a lot of students that are like, hey, I've heard that I shouldn't write about sports. Okay. And it's like, well, why did you hear that? Well, it's because, you know what? For most students, probably shouldn't be writing about sports. An essay that's like, hey, I really like sports, or I really like music, or, that's not that interesting because it's not related to the 5 traits. But if I'm writing about sports and I'm writing about how like I dramatically improved my abilities going from like JV to being like, the captain of my, the varsity team, and, I actually like made my team was terrible. And then I made all these plans and planning, for my different team members to improve. We all got together, we all improved, we all got way better. And now we're one of the best teams of the league. That's showing a ton of leadership. That's showing a lot of intellectual curiosity, drive, like all these different traits. Okay. So it really matters kind of like what you did, right? Related to these. But by and large, like we do find that essays that are about, let's say, athletics or music, band, choir, drama, theater, community service, a lot of times going on mission trips, traveling, like all of those things tend to be more difficult topics to write about because a lot of people are writing about it and they're harder to relate to the 5 traits. But you could still write about those, provided that that is your most compelling content and it relates to one or more of the 5 traits in a meaningful way. Right. That's kind of the way that we think about this or focus on this. So we have lots of students, right, that have a lot of success that are writing about band, right, or writing about athletics because it's their most compelling content, and have a lot of success with that. All right.
So Brett, there is a question about if a student, wants to talk about their intellectual curiosity, but does it have to be in the area that they might want to major in? So for example, what if a student really does a lot with history, but they end up that they really are going to probably major in engineering? Is that too much of a disconnect?
No, not really. Not really. I would say one of the really interesting things is the most intellectually curious people are not just intellectually curious in one thing, right? They are just diving in randomly deep into all sorts of things that just pique their interest, and they're going down those different rabbit holes. Okay. So if you've really gone deep on a lot of history related stuff, that can be awesome as a topic for the essay. Okay. It does help if it relates to maybe what you want to major in, but guess what? It's doesn't matter that much. In the grand scheme of things, about 3 in 4 college graduates are employed in something not related to what they majored in within 5 years of graduation. Okay, that's the actual statistic.
And I think it's like 60% of students end up changing their major. So whatever
it's like
I think they're going to major in now, they might not end up,
I went to MIT and I was a mechanical engineer and management science major, right? So I had a double major. I run a writing education company. Okay, like there's not a lot of stuff that could be like farther from what I majored in. Okay, and so just mentioning like that, and colleges know this, right? So what they want to know is that you're super intellectually curious and you're really driven, because that's why you have to focus on these traits, because those are those traits, like these are traits that just translate to anything, right? These are the same 5 traits that, like, if you're looking at hiring somebody, you're looking for these traits in job applicants as well, right? These are kind of universally important traits. But that's a really good question. Yeah. So like, if you're like a history buff, like write about that, write about your journey of learning, right, associated with that, or engaging with other people associated with that.
And kind of a similar question is, if a student is undecided about what they want to do in college, I mean, do they have to write about that? Do they have to write about what they might be interested in doing in college?
No, I mean, so there's in the common application essay, a lot of times we like to end the essay with a kind of a look to the future of the student. Sometimes that might relate to what the type of thing they might want to major in. Sometimes like it's related to maybe they want to own a business someday, right? Maybe they want to just like, they don't really know what they're going to do, but like they know that it's going to involve like helping others in a deep way, and that can tie back to like the content of their essay in some way, shape, or form. But also there's a lot of great essays that have no look to the future. The reason why we like the look to the future is just because it helps in very few words kind of help the reader kind of see that student on the college campus and after they graduate very easily, and they can kind of see how the story kind of all fits together in a few words. But it's not required. We see students getting in everywhere that do not have like a super strong sense of exactly what they want to go do, and colleges know this, right? So it's kind of a non-issue.
Okay, there's another good question about basically how many of these traits do you need to display in the essay, and are there other places throughout the application that can also help display different versions of these traits?
So you want these like all across the application. Like, so one of the things I like to say, this is a good lead into this next slide, Debbie. I don't know if you knew this was coming. I've done this a lot of times, but so is that every single essay is important. Every single part of your application is really important, because together they're the ones that tell your story, right? So it's not like they're like, hey, the Common App essay is worth 10 points. It's not an exam, right? Where the Common App essay is worth 10 points. And they're like, oh, this student got like a 10 out of 10 on this essay. And then they have this like supplemental essay that's like on, hey, describe an activity that's meaningful to you and why. And they're like, oh, that's only worth 5 points. We're going to give the student a 2 out of 5 on that one. And, the activities list is worth 5 points, right? That's not how they're working, right? They're looking at this holistically. So all of this content basically ties together, and they're basically making about 80 to 100 words of notes associated with your student's application that they've read. Okay. And a lot of those notes are actually related to like the content of like the written components of the application that they have. Like I was fortunate enough at MIT, like I've actually gotten to see my application notes of what the admissions officers made on it. And it was super interesting, right? They're like pulling stuff like specifically out of like different essays I wrote or recommendations that I might have had, or like the interview that I had. And I was clueless back in the day. So like the stuff that actually made it into those notes were generally not part of my essays. It just happened to come up in like my interviews. So like I just got lucky basically. But you want those things to display there. And when I said you don't need to show all 5 of these traits, you want to focus on your 2 or 3 biggest strengths. And generally speaking, for many students, like one experience you've had may show a lot of drive, but it probably also shows some initiative too, right? It's not like one experience only shows one thing, but it might show it stronger, right? One thing stronger than the others. Like you want to focus on your strengths, and if the other traits kind of appear at different points, like that's helpful too.
Okay, Brad, here's a good question. If most students applying to colleges are writing to show the 5 traits, won't most of the essays seem pretty formulaic?
No. I mean, we worked with tens of thousands of students on hundreds of thousands of essays. Okay. And at the same time, the way I always describe this is, so nearly every movie or TV show you've probably ever seen follows the same formula. Do you think that it's formulaic? Probably not, right? So most of these are following like the hero's journey, right? There's different strategies that you're using for like different foreshadowing and other things like that. Like all of this is kind of, you know, a lot of this is like a journey of personal growth. All these stories are fairly different. And once again, what are we looking for in these essays? Like we're looking for the content, right? The and the clarity of that content, so I can understand who the student really is. You know, I'm not looking for, and every student's quite a bit different, right? Has a different story or different experiences to talk about. And so it really does not come across as formulaic at all, right? And in reality, admissions officers love it when they're reading something and they can really easily just understand what they're supposed to understand. Admissions officers are reading a lot of applications every day, and they get really frustrated by applications that they're like, I don't know, like they start reading an essay and they're like, I have no idea where this essay is going. Then they lose their train of thought, right? And once they lose their train of thought, that's kind of like, hey, this student's probably going to end up in like the reject pile or a pile that's not the accept pile. You want them kind of, and it's hard once they're already thinking that, or once their mind starts wandering, to bring them back. Okay. And that's why kind of like the way essays are structured, or like how you write, is so important.
Well, that goes to a question that somebody had. Do you need to have the hook?
Yeah. I mean, hooks are so easy. You know, if you work with one of our coaches, like you'll see how easy it is, because like almost anything can be a hook, essentially. But usually it's like, hey, let's just start at like the most compelling moment of some story, right? And just write 2 sentences on that, and you've already hooked them well enough, right? This isn't like, you know, I was going to think of some TV show that might have had a really good, I don't know. I haven't really watched much television. So anyways, did it come to mind real quick? But you know, it doesn't have to be like the most compelling thing ever. Like it just has to be interesting. Okay. That's all. And so you see a lot of students get into all these schools with just like really solidly written essays. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about kind of the ideal strategy for working on your applications. We'll talk a little about our coaching, look at example essays, we'll take a bunch of Q&A, all that sort of fun stuff. So you have a lot of work to do. Okay, this is the strategy for current juniors. I'm just going to call that out because I know we probably have people here that are, you know, have younger students, or might have younger students. This content's really valuable for you, because guess what? Understanding what colleges are looking for right now can help you figure out,
if there's anybody
here
with a younger student, I always think it's actually really interesting to look at the Common App. I know you might not have to fill it out for like a few years, but see what the real estate is that you have to, you know, talk about what your student has to talk about who they are, and then work backwards and kind of think about what are the most compelling and interesting things they should get involved in.
Yeah, exactly. That's what we always think about is like, hey, if I'm talking with a student that's in our class with, it's like we dive into kind of their interests and you start thinking about, okay, what are the things you could go do to like really focus in or hone in on some of that stuff such that you can have really compelling content. Like you want to do stuff that's related to these, these different traits colleges are looking for, right? If you're junior, this is kind of the process that we recommend. So first of all, is like, and do this now, it's after APs, great time to get started. You want to plan your content you'll use across all of your applications, okay? So generally speaking, this is like all of your experiences that relate to one or more of these 5 traits, okay? Then we kind of prioritize that content, figure out like, okay, what parts of that content are going to go into the common application essay, and then what other parts of that content are going to go into other essays for different applications, right? Because the goal is all of your most compelling content needs to make it onto each application. So, typically speaking, most of the students that we work with are doing their Common App essay, which is the essay that's 650 words you use across most of your schools. They're starting to work on that in June or July. Then they complete their application for their top choice college, like do that in June or early August. Okay. Why do we say do the top choice college first? Is eventually your student's going to get tired of doing college applications. Okay. So start with the one that matters the most to you. Then after you do that, you're going to complete your applications for your next 2 top choice colleges, or the ones that the applications are due the soonest. Okay. Your goal is to finish applications for your 3 schools by the time your senior year starts. This is very possible to do. Okay. A lot of these extra essays, these supplemental essays, they'll get released kind of throughout the summer, with all of them getting released with the common application release date on August 1st. Okay. So all of this is possible to do. Most of the students we work with, like our goal is to get that done because it makes your senior year way more enjoyable for both you as a parent and for your students. Like enjoy that kind of last year that you may have together until they move back in for a while after college, right? So I won't specify how long is a while, but that's the gist of it. And so that kind of allows students to actually spend enough time on this stuff, really think about this very closely, write really good content across, write really strong essays. Without having to worry as much about the deadlines, all the schoolwork, fitting everything together. That's really important. Then you're going to complete the remaining applications that you're doing college by college. Do that 2 weeks. Try to get that done 2 weeks before each deadline. We actually have on our team like customer success managers that literally their entire jobs are to make sure students stay on task. So this is something that matters a lot to us. And because it leads to better applications that you're more confident in and a lot less stress. Okay. It makes the process way easier. What's really cool about this is by the time you've completed your 3 applications, a lot of the other applications you're going to do have a lot of similarities. So you might have written another essay that was 250 words long and you're like, hey, this other essay for this other school is very similar, but it's 150 words in length. So you can kind of modify the 250 word essay for the 150 word essay or vice versa, right? So you start being able to see these connections, and we, I know our coaches and our system that we have actually helps students do that. Okay.
Wait, so Brad, before you do the first draft, what's your suggestion?
Yeah, I'm actually going to talk a little about our coaching first, then we'll get to the first draft, but go ahead.
Okay, about that students and families make sure that they really know all the essays related to a school, because sometimes, it's not just the Common App essay. Sometimes it's, when they're applying to the honors program, all of a sudden another essay pops up.
Yeah, so our program, if you go to myprompt.com/road to college, you can also create a free account, or if you sign up for our coaching, we have an entire system that we've developed, thanks to my, it's helpful having MIT engineers like on the team, right? And so what we do is you input the list of schools you're applying to, and you can actually see every single essay for every single school automatically there. You can select optional essays for different scholarships and other things like that, or certain majors or programs that you have to do. Because as you're going through the Common Application, a lot of times, like as Debbie is saying, like an extra essay might pop up, and we hear horror stories of the students filling it out at the last minute, and they're like, oh no, there's another 100-word essay that I need to write. And guess what? If you don't do a good job on that essay, the college kind of knows that you did it at the last minute. So I know the Dean of Admissions at University of Richmond, him and I were like on a panel for once, and he was just talking about, it's like, I know when the kid has written my supplemental essay at the last minute. I'm like thinking, does this kid really want to go to Richmond? They didn't put the effort in to do it, right? And that was kind of a negative signal for him that they were not that interested in his school, okay? But this is really important, and what's cool about our system is you kind of take this content that you brainstorm that we talked about, and you can match that to the different essays that you're going to write. So you might be able to take a look at that in a bit, but that's kind of how, you know, we work, and we kind of manage the entire essay process basically through this really cool software platform that we have and that you can get access to, right? Cool. Okay, we're going to talk about our coaching. We'll take a look at a example first draft, example final draft, just so you could see kind of like what is the student's journey actually like. Because guess what? A lot of these essays like have to go through some substantial work to get them to the place where they're really compelling. Okay. So we say it's like our goal is to make your student's application impossible to ignore. Okay. So as somebody's reading through these, and they're reading 50 or 100 applications in a day in some cases, right? They're reading through and they're like, oh, you know, I really need to have Debbie, right? Debbie is standing out, right? This is important. Okay. Even right before lunch, because it's actually proven that if your application gets read right before lunch, you have a lower admissions chance because the people are hungry that are reading it, even if it's then, you know, that it's, you know, difficult for them to ignore. And by the way, don't worry about that because you don't control when your application is read during the day. Okay. So let's talk about us. We're the highest rated and most recommended application and essay coaching company. 98% of our students get into one or more of their reach or target colleges. 3 in 4 students get into one or more of their reach colleges, actually. We get hundreds of just many acceptances at every top 100 college every year. And we actually have over 250 high schools that recommend our services to their students. And we tend to come in at like half the price or less of comparable kind of application and essay coaching options. We also have a bunch of free resources. So you can go on to the myprompt.com/road to college landing page. If you scroll down, you'll see a little small link somewhere that's free. Create a free account for free resources. You can use a lot of our content there. And for students that can't afford our coaching services, we also have like essay boot camps, or you just buy an individual review. These are things that, you know, if students are eligible for free and reduced lunch, we provide access to many students for boot camps and reviews for that every single year. Okay. A few things like just in terms of what is the value that we're actually providing, right? And we want to make sure that your student has really compelling content, really clear writing, and that we're holding your student accountable to actually getting the work done early. Those are the big 3 things. So we're helping your student develop their personal brand, identifying with your student what to write about for every part of every application, and then making your students' ideas concise and compelling. So one of the things that we find, especially for very high achieving students, is they have so much content and they basically need to fit all of that content into 1,500 to 2,000 words. Okay. Most writing that students need to do in high school or even in college is they're like, hey, oh shoot, I'm supposed to write a 5-page paper. They're at 3 pages and now they're trying to figure out how to make it 2 pages longer, right? Not a great skill. The important skill is to actually figure out, oh shoot, I have 3 pages of content, but I need to fit it in 1 page. How do I not delete important things? Okay. How do I make sure I include everything, but actually just make my writing really concise and readable and compelling? Okay. And that's one of the #1 things that we work on, especially with high achieving students, is how can we make their writing more concise? How can we actually teach them how to do that? And then holding your student accountable to actually get the stuff done. So over 90% of all applications submitted through the Common App are submitted within 48 hours of the deadline. Okay. So that means that basically the vast majority of students are procrastinating. Guess what? Does it just feel better to get it done earlier? It also means you're probably have stronger applications, you're more confident in your applications, and you just feel way better, right? You're probably going to have a leg up just by like working ahead and getting stuff done earlier. All right, cool. We have well over 100 writing coaches. We hire the top 2% of all coaches, and we match students with coaches based off of their target school lists, their ambitions, and also their learning style and personality a little bit as well. Okay, so if you sign up for our service, you will meet with one of our customer success managers, and they will kind of set you up with the program and select kind of a good coach for you. And then throughout this entire process, we're kind of working together to make your student story shine. So we have the student success manager that's keeping you on task, making sure everything is getting done, helping you create a personalized timeline. So if you have certain vacations over the summer, et cetera, or activities, we're kind of building the schedule around those. And then your writing coach, delivers written feedback on all the essays, as well as does like video coaching calls like with the students. So for Road to College, we have these kind of different packages. You can see these all on the websites as well as the discounted prices. But basically what we have is you can just support just on your Common Application essay. So that's the one essay that's across all schools. It's great value. Right now you're getting $100 off. And if you get Tonight Only, you get an extra $10 off, or you can get help on every essay or every written component of your application for one school, 3 schools, 6 schools, or every school that you're applying to. Biggest discount that we have is for one school for tonight, just in terms of percentage. And we're also doing a raffle, which I'll talk about in a minute, for everybody that buys that through May 21st, which is Sunday at midnight. But what we typically find is like the thing that is kind of the most popular is 3 schools. So support on coaching for up to 3 schools. Second most popular is all schools. And then the Common Application as well. But we get a lot of kind of, basically it's like you get to pick what makes sense for your student. So if, for example, you're wanting to get help just on your top choice college, maybe you're applying early action or early decision to that college, the one school package works really, really well for you. For 3 schools, it's, hey, I'm applying early action, early decision. I'm applying to fairly selective colleges. But I want to make sure that application is really good for early action, early decision. And I'm applying also maybe early action to a couple of, public state institutions and that sort of thing, and fits in there. And for all schools, it's usually students that are applying to many Ivy and Ivy equivalent colleges.
So, and Brad, just to clarify, when you say everything, related to the school, so obviously it's, the Common App, because that's going to be related to multiple schools. It's going to be as many supplemental essays as the school has. Some schools have 1, some schools have 2, some schools have 3. So you won't
some schools have 8.
Right.
Some schools also have, this includes scholarships that are school specific. So if the school has like scholarship essays, which some do, that's included here for certain majors or programs like honors colleges, et cetera. That's all included here. Portfolios, if there's written components of the portfolio, like an artist statement, et cetera, or a builder's portfolio or maker statement, that's included in here. Additional information section, activities list, basically every single written component of the application is included, because together kind of all of that fits together to tell your story. And so that way we can like strategize on like what needs to go where kind of across the application. We also have payment plans. So, if you want to do one of those, you can, sign up for the kind of a call with one of our people, and we can set you up with something like that. Okay.
And can I just add one more thing? So
Yeah.
people should go to myprompt.com, Road to College, because all of this information is there. Don't think you have to kind of like figure out which package you want right now from this slide. And then the other thing though is, Brad, there is a phone number, right? In case they have questions about which is the right package.
Yeah. So there's actually a link that you can schedule a time for us to call you. That's
Okay.
easier than calling a phone number.
Yeah.
So we do have a phone number, but we have found that tends to be a little bit easier. The other thing I'll mention is, once again, there's a couple of Tonight Only extra discounts. So an extra $50 on the one school package for Tonight Only, extra $10 on Common App Essay, extra $100 on all schools. That's through tonight at midnight. All of this is risk-free. So if you're not satisfied after your first coaching call with your coach, you can get a full refund. Okay. So a lot of people, like, why do we do that? It's because guess what? Nobody really does that, right? Because they're really pleased with service. We also have this really cool raffle that we're doing. Just I think it's new for this time.
Yeah.
So if you purchase a one school package by May 21st at midnight, which is Sunday at midnight, you're entered into a raffle to actually win your package for free. So you get it refunded, but guess what? You still get to use it. So we're going to pick one winner for that. But we highly recommend doing that. If you want to get started, now is the time to go ahead and get started with coaching for your student. You can start anytime. You don't have to start immediately.
Right.
But you kind of pick your start date, which is really helpful. So the sooner that you kind of get into this, the sooner you get to select your start dates. But you can start right away, or you could start in June or July or August, kind of pick a time.
Starting doesn't mean that you have to write right away. Starting means you're planning. You're planning.
Yeah, like
the better planning you do before you start to actually write, the easier the writing will be.
Yeah, our first step in the process is actually every student that we work with goes through this really cool like application plan brainstorming module that we have. And then they do a call with their coach, and you're basically like going through talking about your experiences, prioritizing which ones to write about, building those out in more detail, because those are the pieces of content that are going to tie to the different parts of the application. And as I said, everybody gets a personalized timeline for what they're working on. So if there's certain things that you're planning on doing over the summer that you want to work around or build around, that's very possible to do. Okay. We're really flexible. All right. So I'm going to talk through, we could take some questions on this right now, but I'm going to pull up the essays that we're going to take a look at first draft and final draft and go from there. All right.
Actually, Brad, are you okay before you do that example, which I think is great. So yeah, but there's a few interesting questions, which is related to content and writing essays that I think it'd be worthwhile that people want to hear about.
Sure.
Okay. So somebody's asking that they find that students sometimes have a cartoon character that they relate to, or from a movie character, from a TV show. Do you think that this is a strong enough topic to write about, that, to include in an essay, basically like using some sort of character to relate to the student, or to show, things about the students?
Yeah. I mean, I always try to relate it back to the 5 traits, right? So like so here's the challenge, right? A lot of people are like, hey, I need to have some sort of metaphor or simile or like some sort of like catch or whatnot to make the essay more compelling. And you have to say, it's like, okay, if I'm going to compare myself to Popeye the Sailor Man, for example, like how does that actually show that I'm going to be more successful in college and beyond? Me just saying that, oh, I'm, really strong when I eat lots of spinach or whatever it is, like, is not going to be that compelling, right? Or, hey, I'm using that strength to then go help other people. But like, I need to show like very explicit and specific examples from my life. Okay. And like the actions that I have taken. And so a lot of times we see where students are trying, like in a very forced way, to like make these ties to different characters, or make these ties to different situations in the world, or whatever it is. Like it becomes fairly difficult, like where you're like, hey, maybe you start not being able to include all your most compelling content because it is harder to relate to it. Or you're just using extra word count that could be better spent on other things. Okay. So generally speaking, I'm not saying it's a no, I'm just saying it may not be worth the effort type of thing. Like I'd really need to see like the specific example, or what a coach would as well.
Okay, there's another question about, do you guys help with the UC applications?
Yes. We help a lot of students with UC applications. That's one school, right? So that's one application, even though it's across a bunch of schools. So that fits into the one school package. So if you want help just with the UC application, that's your best bet. Okay. And those have 4 350-word essays. Actually, they call them questions, not essays, officially, according to the University of California people.
So here's another question. I don't think you actually really touched on this yet, about how creative does the essay need to be? Like, does there need to be a balance between just being straightforward, or do you have to figure out some way to be creative?
I mean, it really just depends on who your student is or who you are as a student. If you're more of a creative person, like it's probably going to show in your writing anyways, where you're writing stuff. So I think that's totally fine. It doesn't have to be, right? It needs to be about like your experiences in a compelling way. And naturally, kind of as you're writing about those experiences, you need to include details, and those details, sometimes just a few words here and there, can actually make your writing substantially more compelling. What's interesting is that there's a lot of ways to make your writing more compelling that have actually very little to do with the actual like beauty of the words or word choice in many cases. Just literally varying your paragraph length and sentence lengths across different sentences can actually make your writing substantially more compelling. So there's just like a lot of different options basically for that. And you do not need to be like super creative if you don't feel like you naturally are.
Okay, I think it'd be good to, if you want to go to the
All right,
example.
let's do that. We'll take a look at a couple of examples. As I said, just as a reminder, we have those extra discounts tonight available through midnight Pacific time, totally risk-free. So if you're not satisfied after your first coaching call with your coach, you can get a full refund. And then, as I said, you can set up a time to call us as well. If you're interested in a payment plan or you just want to talk about your options, if you go to the pricing page at myprompt.com/road to college, there's also a lot more information about each of these options there. Okay, cool. All right, I'm going to show a couple of essays. We're going to take a look at a first draft of an essay, and what you'll see here is first draft, and we'll take a look at like a near final version of this essay. And so this is like really the reason why I use this essay. It's like, this is really common, right? Fairly high performing student, but, is not, she ended up at the University of Michigan at a really kind of difficult program to get into there. And she got into a bunch of other schools like UC Berkeley. I think she got into Vanderbilt. But, it wasn't like she was, going after like Harvard and those other ones, right? So like just a really strong student, okay? And what you'll see in this first draft is that she very much focuses on, hey, I need to tell a single story in my life, okay? And guess what? As we've learned about, is like, that may not be the best option. So let's go ahead. We're going to read through this essay. This is really focused, like they really wanted to be creative. They really wanted to use a lot of these kind of tie to these myths associated with college admissions essays. We'll look at the final version. And once again, like this always needs to be in the student's voice, always needs to be like related to what is kind of their feelings, their level of creativity, what they want to be covering, that sort of thing. Okay. So I'll go ahead and read it. Looking down, I saw the pieces of shredded pork starting to fall out of the gaping hole. The woman gawked at me from the other side of the food bar as I tried to think of an excuse. Her choice of fillings was awful. How could she expect to wrap over 2 scoops of 3 cheese queso and shredded pork without at least half the filling squirting out? I'm new, I blurted, using the same excuse I had given at least 50 previous customers. I can see, she replied. An awkward silence followed, and I knew I had to save her dead burrito. It was my second week at my summer job at Qdoba Mexican Grill, and my lumpy, soggy burritos were a daily routine. I couldn't understand why I was struggling so much with making burritos when I was succeeding in a tough course load. I understood the first part of folding it like a dumpling, but rolling the burrito was a whole other story. No matter how hard I tried, the burrito would rip open, fall apart, squirt out liquid, or better yet, all three as the end result. It was horrendous. I used to cringe every time someone asked me for a burrito because I knew that the end result was not going to be pretty. This was my hardest burrito yet. Instead of freezing up and shoving the mess to another worker like I always did before, I forced myself to continue despite her angry glare. Quickly heating another tortilla, I transferred the contents to the lower half so I could save more room to roll over. After lifting the cover, I finally noticed the sogginess was coming from the pico de gallo and beans. After draining, I tried to make it quickly, but my heavy-handed pressure caused it to rip open. I tried again with gentle fingers, but it just fell apart. Taking a deep breath and with shaking hands, I tried another method, folding horizontally with firm pressure. To my delight, it stayed. Rolling the burrito, I wrapped the orange foil over and gave it to the customer, chiming, "Thank you, enjoy." I almost saw a hint of a smile on her face before she left. This was my that was my proudest moment all year. Since the beginning, I dreaded how the burrito would decide to turn on me. But looking at the obstacle as a fun challenge helped me to make a burrito I could actually serve to customers. It was in no ways perfect, but who can make a perfect burrito? Instead of thinking I couldn't do this because of potential problems, I changed my mindset to I will try my best. If mistakes happen, that's just a natural part of the process. Just like the different burritos I have made, I will encounter many different challenges that I will have to adapt to. Even though the bigger challenges carry greater potential for mistakes, the reward is much greater, not just for me, but for other people. Sometimes the whole process is just as if not more rewarding than the end product. Working for the answer is more enjoyable than having it automatically given to me. I never underestimate a potential challenge, no matter how small, because those may even be the hardest to stay focused on. I look at mistakes as opportunities to grow and find a better way. I look forward to challenges big or small that I will face not just in college, but life. Draining the distractions and little problems will help me overcome challenges more easily. How can I adjust by teaching so people understand what glomerulopathitis and projectile motion are? Where does the 8 Mile Kensington bike path continue? Life will throw many more lumpy burritos at me, but I know what the next step will be. Okay. So I want everybody to drop into the chat kind of what traits, whether or not it's specifically the 5 traits or maybe different words that came to mind. Like, what did I actually learn about the student? Who are they? Like, what traits did they exhibit? And then secondly is like, how strong are those traits? Like, how strongly do they come through? Drop those into the chat. We have drive, we have persistence, perseverance, drive, adapting to challenges. Great. Okay. So what's interesting here is, you can see a little bit of problem solving, you can see some persistence, you could see some drive. This is just folding a burrito. Okay. So I'd hope if you worked at Qdoba, I could even grow. Like if I was an admissions officer, I'm like, that's nice. But is this student like, so they're a bit driven, but like, are they unusually driven? Like, are they like, if I compare them to other people, would other applicants have this problem with this burrito? Like that sort of thing, right? So what you see here is like, this is like pretty typical. Like you might be able to find a little bit of these traits, but like if you had to put them on a scale of like how driven is the student, you'd be like, I don't know, right? And if you only went on this information, you'd be like, maybe not that driven, okay? So that's kind of the grand scheme of things. Not to mention, like a ton of word count goes to writing about this story. You could probably tell this entire story in like 40% of the word count, and I would lose lose nothing of it. I would probably barely be able to tell that it's different. Like I'm covering different information. There's also a lot of this stuff where it's like, hey, I'm getting fairly philosophical here. Okay, so now I'm like, hey, the process is just rewarding the end product. Working for the answer is more enjoyable, blah, blah, blah. It's like, guess what? The philosophy, that's nice. You learn these things, but prove them to me. Like, how did you actually change? Like, how does this, like, is there other situations in your life that also show you these things? Are you driven in these other situations in your life? Are you, don't have things automatically given to you? Are you overcoming other challenging situations? Like, what's happening? Okay. A lot of students like wax philosophical in their essays. And guess what? You're 17 or 18. Okay. Like, you probably don't have like this huge earth-shattering worldview. Okay. It's important to talk about what's important. What you may have learned about yourself, but you need to prove it. Like, prove to me that you've really changed with other actions or other things that you may have done. One of the things that's super interesting here is they're like, how can I adjust my teaching to people understand what glomerulopathitis and projectile motion are? It's like, that's really interesting, but then I learned nothing else about it. Okay. But that could be something really important for that student. So this is like, it's pretty common. Like you see a lot of students write about like one experience or one of these smaller things. And that can be okay if it's like a bigger thing or that's the most compelling thing that the student has. But there's like, just like, you could tell that the student has a lot more. And yet they're focusing on here. And they wanted to write probably about a burrito because they've seen a bunch of example essays online where you're like, hey, this is like a good story to tell. Like, it's a fun kind of story to tell. Like, you can use some really cool language and creativity and all that sort of stuff. Well, let's take a look at the final version where the student was like, hey, I really still want to write about the burrito. It's like, well, okay, great. Like, let's figure out how to do that and yet still accomplish all the goals that we need to accomplish. Okay. So you'll see here that the story is way shorter. You'll see other elements being added to the story, which we'll talk about. You'll see new things related to glomerulonephritis in here and like what the heck is going on with that. And you'll see it's just like a lot more compelling. All right. So the pieces of shredded pork started falling out of the gaping hole. The woman gawked at me from the other side of the counter. How could she expect me to wrap over 2 scoops of 3 cheese queso and shredded pork without at least half the filling squirting out? I'm new, I stuttered for the 13th time that day. It was an excuse for my continual failure. I'd been on the job at Qdoba Mexican Grill for 3 weeks and my lumpy soggy burritos were a daily humiliation. I couldn't understand why making burrito was so hard when I had no trouble with calculus problems and memorizing hundreds of parts in anatomy. During wrapping, the burrito would rip open, fall apart, squirt out liquid. On the worst days, I fell victim to all 3. But at that moment, I mentally decided, that's it. I'm going to solve this problem and figure out how to wrap a burrito. So this is now providing a lot of direction to the essay, like in terms of what's happening and tying to problem solving. I forced myself to continue despite the 2 glaring eyes that watched my every fold. Quickly heating another tortilla, I transferred the contents to the lower half so I can make more room to fold over. I noticed the sogginess was coming not from not draining the pico de gallo well enough. So I wiped off the excess moisture. Then I tried a different wrapping method, a horizontal fold. To my delight, it stayed. Rolling the burrito, I wrapped up the orange foil over and gave it to the customer, chiming, "Thank you, enjoy." I almost saw a hint of a smile on her face before she left. After that day, I continued to find little improvements in my burrito making career and happily helped a new worker named Jasmine with properly positioning and smearing the guacamole and wrapping it over. So now you see some like contribution, like tying some additional stuff in, as well as continuing to make improvements. From successfully making different burritos, I learned that persistence of studying the problem from different angles is the best approach to helping me improve. I thought I was just naturally good at calculus and anatomy, but even trying a different approach for calculus helps me solve a problem more efficiently. Anyone can learn anything as long as they set their mind to it. I now look at mistakes as opportunities to grow and find a better method. I think they could have just deleted this whole paragraph, but they really wanted to keep it, so it's there. All right, I look forward to future challenges that I might have to solve using different methods. Draining the little problems will help me more easily create a solution. As health occupation students of America hosts a pathophysiology team leader, my responsibility is helping my team members learn about diseases and preparing for competitions. I used to provide written notes from the book, but I saw that many of them struggle to understand glomerulonephritis because it is so similar to other urinary diseases like nephritis. I decided to test new approaches to teach the material. I matched pictures with diseases, made a polycystic kidney using bubble paper, and played a Be the Doctor game. I discovered that learning with written notes and memorization worked for me, but that interactive learning through games provided both my team members and me with a deeper understanding of the material. My strategy made an impact. My team scores went from 60 to 90% on quizzes, and 2 of my teammates placed as finalists at the state leadership conference. Burritos and Hosa taught me to look at problems with a different viewpoint and work together with others to achieve goals. As a doctor, I may have to use different approaches to find an underlying problem. For example, I might have to use a cardiogram or Doppler cardiography just to find a tiny clot in the heart that would affecting the whole body. I also need to work together with the patient to find the best treatment. Life is going to throw many more lumpy burritos at me, but I know how to approach each one. Okay. So this is still not like the most perfect essay in the world, but it really kind of showed the student had their tone, their voice, and everything in it. But here's what's really important, okay, is this is the single most important line in this entire essay right here. My strategy made an impact. My team scores went from 60% to 90% on quizzes, and 2 of my teammates placed as finalists at the state leadership conference, okay? So now you can see her impact. It's not just talking about like, oh, this is nice. Like I made little games for people to play, like to learn some new material, blah, blah, blah. That's nice. Well, guess what? What she did clearly had a massive impact because her team did extremely well, right? As a result of the actions that she took, all right? So now you see that she's solving problems. You see that she's driven. You see that she's intellectually curious. She's taking some initiative. She's contributing to others. You see a lot of the different 5 traits, but you can see how strong she is in some of these areas now, okay? Like this is a lot more compelling. And she's able to tie this to, okay, this Hosa thing, actually she wants to be a doctor. She actually has some knowledge in this area, right? It appears with this little line she included here. She was able to tie this back to the beginning a little bit. So you're starting to see a lot more about who this student is. And you're starting to see that, hey, this student is probably like unusually driven or like unusually, taking the initiative, right? Or contributor or whatever it is, right? So this is like the extra language, the extra ways that you can make writing more concise, where you can add little elements in that are just going to make it substantially more compelling. All right. So I'm going to pause there. I'm sure there may be some other questions or things that have come in, Debbie, kind of along the way. But, we'll stick around as long as there's some questions. We'll then wrap up. But I just want to mention once again, if you're looking for coaching, we have deals through Sunday. We have the raffle through Sunday as well. So if you get a one school package, for example, by May 21st, right, you're entered into the raffle. Highly recommend doing that at least. But we also have all the other coaching options that are available to you. If you start with one school and you want to upgrade later, you can definitely do that. So that is a choice of yours, but you may not get the discount that's later on the upgrade.
But maybe you said it a little bit, but repeat it again, because there are a few questions about how does a coach really work with the student to figure out what they should write about?
Yeah. So the first thing that we have every student do is they spend about an hour and a half or 2 hours before their first call with our coach, going through what we call our application plan. Okay. And that's in our platform. And it basically walks them through a lot of the stuff we talked about today related to the 5 traits, but we also have a ton of brainstorming questions related to the 5 traits. So what they're doing is kind of they're thinking through their answers to some of these questions, et cetera, and they're able to share that with their coach before their first call with their coach. Then on the first call with their coach, they're actually going through and adding detail to all those different experiences. They're prioritizing those different experiences, et cetera. So our coach is just really good. Our coaches are really good at asking the right questions to get to the point where the content is the most compelling. So you see in this example of the essay that we just saw, the most impactful line was about the impact that they had on students. Now, most students don't realize they need to include that themselves or even how to think about that. And so, but we know those are the questions that we ask, right? So, hey, you founded this club. Okay, let's start talking about what that is, right? How many members does it have? How many does it start with? How many does it have now? What have you accomplished? What did you specifically do? What was your unique contributions? And we're able to go through these types of lines of questioning to really build out this content and then help the student figure out and prioritize what's the most compelling and then match that to the different essays that they need to write, right? And we're doing that actually on video calls with the students, right? So you in the platform, you'll see calls that you could set up with your coach. You set those up, and then once you've gotten to the point where you're writing essays, you're then moving more into written feedback, where your coach is providing really detailed written feedback on each of the essays that you're writing. Okay, and we're doing that until both you and your coach is confident in your essays, right? So you're confident in the entire application that you're submitting to colleges.
But it can't hurt as a parent to kind of do this conversation with your student before they end up talking to a coach, because then they'll maybe just all of these ideas, kind of.
Yeah, what we do is there's actually a form for parents to fill out too. So a little less in depth than the student stuff, but there's things that we're asking you as well as a parent that are just give us additional information to go on, where it actually helps us kind of, because you might have some ideas on what are the most compelling things your student has done that might be different than what they think is the most interesting thing that they have done, right? And so we're using that information as well. And you can even, we have parents that actually sit down with their student and actually go through the application plan together before the first call. We have parents that come to the first call, although it's not required at all. I wouldn't recommend it. I don't think you need to, but some just kind of seeing how it is, right? And kind of the experience there. So I think it's, and you can be involved as much as you want. I think that you don't really need to be involved. We get your student to an amazing place. But, some parents want to read the essays kind of along the way, or, contribute little pieces of information, or you're like, hey, what about X, right? And sometimes X is a great addition, and other times it's actually, maybe we shouldn't have that. And, we have a conversation about it, right? With your customer success manager or your coach, these are things that happen kind of along the way. But, it's really it's a really a one-on-one, experience, right? You're working with the same coach across all of your, applications and essays across the whole application season.
Okay, switching a little bit, there's a question which comes up a lot, which is a good one, about a topic. This idea of like if a student has gone through some form of a tragedy, either they've been sick or a family member has been sick, and that has dramatically changed their life. Like how do those topics do? How well do they do in the essays?
Yeah, I mean, everybody likes, in some ways, in some situations, right? You might say, well, or an admissions officer would call it like a sob story or that sort of thing, right? Like where you've really had to overcome some stuff as a student. Now the key is the overcome part. Okay. And so, if you've gone through some sort of tragedy or really difficult time, it's really about just not about writing about that time, but that time could be a very small portion of the essay. And then the question is like, what are the actions? Like, how did this affect you? And like, how did that affect actions that you then went on to take? Okay. And generally speaking, like, how did this make you in some way, shape, or form change the way you view the world, but just like also make you kind of better or more likely to be more successful in college and beyond, right? So we get a lot of questions about like, do I write about anxiety and depression and needing to overcome that? And well, the answer is like, well, in those situations, if you've had something like that in your past, like that might be a signal that maybe you won't be successful in college and beyond. But many students that have gone through that are actually more likely to be successful, right? But they need to prove that, right? You prove that, hey, I learned this new way to study, or like I learned XYZ, I became a lot more successful. Like all of these different things can come into play, but you kind of need to prove it, right? So what you don't want to do is you don't want to write an essay about like a bad breakup with your significant other, for example, or your student, and like that's what the entire essay is about, right? Or hey, there was a family tragedy, maybe it was in COVID, whatever it is, and that's what the entire essay is about, right? A lot of times that's what we call an inciting incident, right? Like this point, in storytelling that like is the starting point for a much longer journey that becomes the bulk of the essay that's being written about, that then relates to one or more of the 5 traits in a significant and meaningful way.
Okay, and then this is going back to process. Just a lot of good questions about, is there a time limit about how long the student can work with the coach? How many times can they interact, relative to, let's say, the Common App package or any of these packages?
Yeah. So the answer to that is that we have a process that we go through with students where we know that it works really well. Okay. And so we do a lot of video calls, we do a lot of written feedback on essays, but there is no limit.
Maybe.
Okay. So in other words, like along the way, if we feel that your student, like you feel you need like some additional calls or additional rounds of feedback on an essay, that sort of thing, or you want to say, hey, I'm not happy where this essay went, like let's have a conversation about it, like we can, right? There's not a limit that says, hey, you only get like 10 hours or 5 hours or 20 hours, right? I think last year, this was kind of wild. Like we had one student with all schools. They applied to so many schools. I think they used like 90 hours of coaching. Okay. It was a little excessive. But a lot of students are using like 30 to 50 hours of coaching in all schools. Common App is usually 4 to 5 hours of coaching. One school is, I think, typically like 8 to 10 or so, somewhere in that range. It varies, right? There's not a set limit. The real goal is to get to the point where you and your student are you're as a family, and then also especially your students and our coaches are confident in the application that you're submitting, that this is your best work. Okay. And that's really important to us. That's important to you as well. And we've worked with tens of thousands of students. And so we have a really good understanding of like, what are the best and most efficient ways for you to get to the best essays?
Okay, and last question. Well, I'm switching back to more content. What do you think about a student focusing their essay on like their cultural identity? Or is that too common?
I mean, it is very common, right? I would say once again, has to relate to one or more of the 5 traits. Okay. A lot of times what you end up with is a student that's writing about the cultural identity. It really is like, hey, my cultural identity has led me to do all of these other things that then relate to these traits. Okay. But the cultural identity part is really important to understand in order to be able to relate it. Why are they doing these other experiences? Like, why are they attending the these different activities, or these different why are they in the church choir? Like, why are they, like, all of these different things that, like, okay, like that identity element can be really important. Where it's not that interesting is we see a lot of essays, because you see some examples of good essays online that include some of this, which is like, hey, I'm going to write about my cultural identity, and I'm going to write about how, like, family dinners are really important, and it relates to like the types of food that are being cooked right at our meals, right? That tends to be really difficult to relate to one or more of the 5 traits, right? So it really just depends on, like, as I always say, it's like no topic is necessarily a bad topic, provided it relates to one or more of the 5 traits in a significant and meaningful way.
Okay, and last, I know I keep saying last, but this is the last, and this is just
This is actually the last one, really, Debbie? I mean, we've been going for a little while, but you know what? Usually we do about an hour and a half.
Right.
So this is kind of your
This is just a small process question too. A lot of people asking, if I start out with one of these packages and I realize I need more, can I upgrade?
Yes, you can upgrade. Typically, like, there may not be the discount associated with that, or the level of discount associated with that. At some point in the year, usually it's September, we increase our prices as they get closer to deadlines as well. But you could definitely do that. We recommend figuring out which one you likely are going to use and starting with that. But we also have, like, it's pretty common that students will, families will start with 3 schools. They'll be like, hey, we're applying early action in some places. We want to see if we get in first. And then they get in and they're like, we don't need the extra coaching, or they're like, that was a little bit of a reach, applying to X school. We didn't get in early December, and then they, get extra coaching later. We also find, let's say you start with 1 schools, later in the year, you also, within our platform, have the option of just buying extra reviews of essays. So some people will say, hey, I'm going to do 1 school. Oh, there's also this, and that includes like the honors college essay. And then they're applying to another school that also has an honors college essay, and they'll just buy 1 or 2 reviews of that, right? And not need to buy the 3 schools. So that's what happens. We typically don't, my point is like, you can kind of flexibly do this. The way we see it is that, typically, like, think about like how many, I know you don't have your school list probably entirely set yet, but you probably have a pretty good idea of like how many relatively selective schools you're applying to, or fairly competitive programs that you're applying to, where the admissions rates are, let's say, 25% and below. If you're interested in, like, well, it's just how competitive is this? You could just Google, like, computer science, University of Washington computer science program admit rate, right? You just Google that, you can find the admit rate, or Vanderbilt admit rate. Like, you kind of get a sense of like where does this tend to lie, and kind of figure out like which of these may be the best option. If you have questions about it, like, you can schedule a time for us to call you, and we can just walk through it together, and you can talk with us about some of the schools you're applying to. We have a really, our team really understands the stuff, right? Because we live this, year in and year out every day, right? So we could definitely guide you to the best option for you. But also, like, if you have, sign up for one of these, you have your first call with your customer success manager, they can also guide you if you have questions. They're like, hey, we're thinking of doing this other one. They can also guide you there too. So if you want to make the purchase and then do that later, that's totally fine as well. Okay.
Great.
We tend to be really nice. Like, that's the main thing.
Well, great. Thank you, Brett. Thanks to everybody for showing up and listening. And I just encourage people to get started or get your plans together. The summer kind of goes by quickly. We're almost there at the start of the summer, and it's just such a great time to, take advantage of this. We get a lot of people, Brad even gets the more that at the last minute say, I need help. We in Prompt can always help at the last minute, but it's just not as, you're not going to get the same outcome necessarily. And it's just so much more of a pressured situation.
Yeah. And I'll say is that the students that start earlier than year with us, one of my team members was just going over the numbers with me today on this, actually use more hours of coaching, right? And that's because, makes sense, right? Because there's not that time pressure associated with, oh shoot, like it's October, we just signed on for this, like we got to get everything done. And they have all the schoolwork to do. There's actually more time to like really hone in on the stuff, get those like 3 top choice applications, as we said, like that's the goal for the senior year starts or early, before September at least. And a lot of students are able to get there, right? We're close to it, right? Where they're at least getting their top 1 or 2 done. And that just makes your whole year feel so much better. I guarantee it. You'll feel great.
And with any type of writing, I use the word marinate. Sometimes you just need to let it sit, take a little time away, and then come back to it and read it, and you get fresh eyes on it. And when you're rushing at the last minute on a deadline, you just don't get that time.
Yeah. I always say it's like, well, if you start writing an essay 2 hours before it's due, it'll get done in 2 hours, but that may not be your best work. Right. So, the important part here is, as you saw the first draft to the final draft of what this particular student had, there's just a lot of improvement that's made, right? There's a lot of work on the student side. There's a lot of work on the coach side. And, getting to the point where, hey, this is really like the most compelling content. This is the best writing. Everybody feels like the most confident that this is the best that they can produce. That's the place that we want to be in. You don't want to feel like you submitted an application, you left something on the table, right? So if you don't get in somewhere, you gave your best effort, and you get in somewhere and you're like, I know I gave my best effort, and that might be why I made it, right? So that's all. Well, thanks, Debbie.
Thank you.
Also, if anybody has any questions, I'll be online this evening. My email address is brad@myprompts.com. I dropped that into the chat. You can message me, email me, this evening, anytime this week. I can pass you on to the right person to actually answer your questions, or I could use my best efforts and go from there. All right. Very good.
Thank you. Good night,
Thanks,
everyone.
everybody. Bye.
Bye.